Trish may not remember, but I vividly remember the first time that I met her. It was November the 2nd last year at an Inner Wheel conference, and Trish was actually our keynote speaker. She spoke very movingly, with humour and lots of information about her personal insights and experiences of hearing loss. And I was so determined after that, as a trustee of Hearing Ambassadors, to do even more to be inclusive and including of everybody. Trish, you won't realise that while you were talking, I was taking notes. And I'm actually going to, if you'll allow me, to read back the quote that has stuck in my mind ever since I heard you talk. You said, "No one can ever imagine what it is like being deaf. It's a truly invisible disability. Be supportive and inclusive in everything you do." Trish, we are more than delighted that you are our first speaker, and I know this evening you will leave a lasting impression on everybody that hears you. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank all the rest of you, because it's together that we can make a difference. Trish, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl. Thank you. So good evening, everybody. I'm Trish Greenwood. I'm a Bradford Rotarian, and I'm also a member of the Hearing Together Rotary Online. I really want to talk about how I navigate deafness in a hearing world. I think people assume when you become deaf, it's just another part of your life and a run-on that people accept, but they don't. So my hearing loss journey actually began as early as 17. I joined the Royal Air Force and I failed the first hearing test. By the way, I have a cold, so if people can't hear me, I can talk a bit louder. Once I'd failed that test, I was called back for a second one. And as I was accepted and I joined the Royal Air Force, I figured everything was fine, never thought any more about it. Move on 10 years, I was married, I had a couple of kids, and I was in the cinema with them watching a movie. And I suddenly thought, I can't actually hear what's being said, and realised I must be lip reading. Thinking then that I probably had an ear infection, off I went to the doctors, who sent me to audiology, who gave me a hearing test and said, yes, you need 2 hearing aids. And I was 27. It's very hard when you hear the words, you need 2 hearing aids, because I was 27. It's a bit like seeing somebody with a limp and saying, here, have a stick. It kind of has the same effect. Within the NHS, there's no definitive diagnosis for hearing loss unless ear disease is suspected, and then you might have further tests. Those of you here that wear a hearing aid, you will know that shock of when you first have them switched on. First of all, while going through the process, for me, it was the realization that this actually wasn't going to get better. I probably stupidly thought at that didn't think at that moment, it wasn't going to get any worse. So 2 hearing aids were going to be the worst I would suspect. However, once they were switched on, a different realization hit me. The noise was phenomenal. I sat there and promptly, by the time I'd got myself out to the car park, and I'm sure those who've got hearing aids know this, they were out of my ears, they were in my handbag, and that was the end of it. There's no way I could cope with the clatter that was going through my head. It disturbed everything. I didn't tell anybody. I felt embarrassed. It was very difficult to, where do you start a conversation? So I started the conversation with my sister. And suddenly my sister said to me, I'm so glad you talked about this. I said, why? She said, well, I'm in the same position. She said, I also have been given 2 hearing aids, and I suspect our mother probably has a hearing loss as well. Have you not noticed we shout at her a lot? But when you have a hearing loss, you're not really aware of how much you are shouting. So for me now, I can't pitch myself at all. I don't know if I'm shouting. I wouldn't know if I'm whispering. What we couldn't really understand was why we had become deaf, because surely you were born deaf, or surely you would be in your 70s and 80s and have age-related hearing loss. So that was a big struggle for us. We'd not worked in noisy mills, we'd not had an accident, and there is no help. There was no internet then to have a look and just see what might be happening. You just had to accept that you were losing your hearing. We never thought about things like British Sign Language, or because we could manage with these hearing aids. Also recognising we both lip read very well, not through any learning, but just through necessity. So why didn't I wear my hearing aids? Well, initially because they were very loud, but the second was embarrassment. So you meet somebody, hi, give them a hug, and they recoil from you. Well, we don't know why that is. We learn it's because of feedback. So you press your head against somebody else's, the feedback is quite loud, apparently, but when you're deaf, you don't hear it. However, the person that you're cuddling, you've just deafened them because the noise is quite acute. Your batteries run out at the wrong time, you have to take your hearing aid out in public. There's many things that make it something you just don't want to be public. Hearing aids aren't a cure. My denial of what was happening to me, I wanted them to be a cure, and I was really disappointed. I retreated into myself and I tried to engineer coping mechanisms, disguise misconversations. People do make fun. Oh, she's a bit deaf. And they think that's funny, not really realising that that's quite hurtful. Isolation soon brought very low self-esteem for me, and I started hiding myself away. This prevailed when people started treating me like I was stupid. So I would say to people about my hearing loss, that wasn't an issue. They would then turn away from me and start speaking to my companion, which made me feel inadequate, because at the end of the day, I wasn't stupid. I could understand what they were saying once I could hear it. Relationships in my family, they suffered. It was difficult for kids to hear me. It was difficult with work. Can you imagine moments when somebody says to you, I love you, and you say, pardon? And they say, I love you. And you say, oh, hang on a minute, can you just say that again? I've not got my hearing aids in, just wait a minute. Well, you can imagine the moment's lost. And when that's really personal, it's difficult. You know, we can't hear whispers in the dark, and we certainly can't lip read. I always raised my kids to be different and to accept the impossible. I worked for myself. I got people to take phone calls, and I hid everything very well. The thing I found difficult was with my children, going to assemblies at school. Not just with my children, but now with my grandchildren. I often sit on the back row and I watch them, and I'm super proud. But I sit quite often and cry because I can't hear what they say. And it's a moment in their life that I can never recover. So we need other things to help people like me and anybody here to cover the distance between the two things. I used to be a reader at school, and you can imagine all the kids, they read to me, they got the book ticked and off they went. They never got it wrong because I actually couldn't hear. So eventually that was something I had to give up. In 2011, my husband Richard became a Rotarian. Suddenly there were dinners and fellowships, and I decided at 49 I would have to get my big girl's knickers on, so to speak, and get out there and meet people again and stop hiding behind other people. So I embraced meeting new people. volunteering, making friends. Rotary was a gentle environment. I realised after the first time I did this that actually small talk really was small talk for me around a table, because I couldn't hear what the other person said back to me. I can't tell you in a week how many people say to me, I really struggle with background noise. Well, with hearing aids on, it's doubled or trebled. Worse still, I couldn't hear the main speaker. There were no subtitles. The worst was I drove home and I thought to myself, how am I going to tell Richard and not disappoint him? And most of all, how was I going to survive this? Digital hearing aids became a godsend. They were absolutely brilliant from what I had. But again, I moved up amplification very fast and wondered what was going to be next for me. So about 8 years ago, I met online tonight is Professor Chris Rain, and I met him through Rotary. He's a consultant at Bradford Infirmary of so many things I couldn't name them. But after a few hearing tests with him, he leant forward and very quietly and clearly said to me, how do you cope? And I went away and thought, what does he mean? And I suddenly realised I was getting worse and it was going to end in deafness. Often introduced as Trish at meetings or at functions. Trish, this is Trish. She's hard of hearing. You have to speak up to her. I found the courage eventually to actually say, hi, what they actually mean is I'm Trish and I'm deaf. So I lip read very well. And let's start with that. And what is the reaction? Well, most people walk off after they've done their initial introduction. And if they don't walk off, they start speaking to my husband instead. It's quite crushing when that happens to you, and it is very emotional. Eventually, realising people probably didn't know what to say to me when I said, well, I'm deaf. It's a little bit like bereavement when you're passing somebody up the street and you know they've just lost somebody and you're not quite sure what to say. So you pretend you didn't see them and you carry on walking up the road. But I broke out of the shell and decided I was either going to stay at home and just give up on life or accept myself for who I am and where my heart led, which was being a helper and being a volunteer, and not the person that I'd actually become. So during COVID, I volunteered as an NHS responder. Now, I couldn't do the companion phone calls, so Richard did that for me, but I did all the door-to-door work, because standing door-to-door, you stood far enough away from people. You didn't have to wear a mask. I worked also with Bradford West Rotary, collecting wash bags, delivering material, whatever. And soon I thought in 2021, I think I can do this. I'm going to become a Rotarian. By 2023, I was actually a deaf president of my Rotary club. And the only reason I could do that was the support of my club. People did understand. They were prepared to listen about my deafness. And together we tried different equipment, caption programs. We still experiment nowadays. Lip reading for 40 years was a great bonus. But people were great in my club. I realised it was okay to be different and you could still succeed. And people were great at standing up when I said, look, I can't do this. There would be question and answer. And they did it for me. Just a small thing about COVID and masks. I'm sure a lot of people struggled during COVID wearing masks or watching people with masks. And I remember going to do an errand for a lady as an NHS responder into a sandwich shop. And I said to the lady, I showed her my card that said, I am a lip reader, please remove your mask. And she said to me, oh no, you've got that wrong. You need to remove your mask. So I said, oh, why? Are you a lip reader? And she said, well, I find you very rude. And I thought, can you not see that I can't read your lips? You don't need to read mine. People just didn't get that thing. And when they developed the masks, you know, with the little plastic bit, people would say to me, why don't you wear one? And I think because I'm the lip reader. And it really heightened the difficulties. If you imagine certain things, I don't know who has good hearing and who doesn't. Just for 1 second, close your eyes. I'm going to say something. So what I'm going to say is, close your eyes. What kind is this? What time is this? That's it. Open your eyes. Did everybody get there were 2 separate parts to that conversation? I wouldn't, because they sound the same, because things that have a vowel that are in the same position. Does anybody remember the Chinese whisper? You know, send reinforcements, we're going to advance. And it ends up as send 3 and 4 pence, we're going to advance. Well, that is my life. And so at Rotary clubs, I stand up to answer a question, but it actually wasn't the question that was answered. But it is okay, because these people love me and I trust them. When I talk to about deafness at clubs, women talk about, oh yeah, my husband's got selective hearing. But anybody who knows anything about hearing loss knows that women actually have quite high frequency voices, and men who lose their hearing are less likely to come forward than a woman. And because when your wife is speaking to you, your voice is very high frequency, quite often it is actually the sign of the beginning of a hearing loss in older age. It's not selective hearing, they're actually just not hearing. We lose these higher frequencies, bird song, water dripping, children's voices. So reducing background noise is brilliant. Pitch and tone when people speak to me is really important. And this is what I try and teach and spread the word around with other clubs. The other thing is, it's very easy to be tokenized. So making out that we're accepted and we're welcome in places, but people do that sometimes because they want to have a deaf friend or somebody who is in a minority. But actually, all is what we want is somebody to be our friend and just accept our disability. I'm sure Cheryl will remember this. Backhanded compliments I get a lot. So, oh, you manage very well, don't you? Oh, you don't sound deaf. And I say straight away, no, I don't. I learned to speak and I didn't lose my hearing fully until I was 27. Worse still, people then say to me, well, you don't look deaf. So I say to them, well, do you know what? You don't look stupid, but we're having the conversation. And there we go forward, because now I have reached a point where it's not about being proud of being deaf. It's about saying there are millions of other people. I think there's something like 18 million people in the UK with hearing loss. A couple of years ago, I decided I would learn British Sign Language. And what a lovely language. I don't know if anybody uses British Sign Language. It's fantastic. It is so expressive. I was given my British Sign Language name. So obviously most of us would spell out our name, Trish. But mine is this, helper, helper. Purely because when I went to lessons, I'd usually come from Rotary, so I had a t-shirt and the conversation became around that. So now when I go to a deaf club event, the majority of people there are native British Sign Language users. They are people who were born deaf. So they don't accept me because I haven't always been deaf. However, when I do things in the hearing world, it's hard to be accepted because you are sidelined because you are deaf. And there is the navigating deafness in a hearing world. Sometimes I can't fit in either correctly. In Rotary, I really don't think I've researched this. I think in America, there's one American Sign Language club, but in the UK, I don't think there is. My deaf teacher says to me about volunteering. Well, how would I know there are, 16,000 children on food poverty in Bradford? Or, well, how would I know about helping? who would communicate with me if I came to your club? Well, not everybody has to learn British Sign Language, but if we are deaf aware, it would make this much better. My teacher came with me to in churches. She helped teach children who came there from poorer backgrounds, they had disabilities, and she was brilliant, teaching them the colours of fruits and the names, and they absolutely loved it. And this is why I love it that British Sign Language is now part of high school lessons. I think I can manage things exactly the same as a hearing person. It's just different. Do you want to know what one of the worst things is for me to try and do? I can't for the life of me order a McDonald's at the intercom for the kids. So I stand there, open my window, I turn my engine off to give myself the best chance. And I say to them, 2 chicken nuggets and chips, 1 cheeseburger, whatever. So I think they're asking me to say it again. So I say double cheeseburger. So we end up, we go down to I say to them, look, I'm a lip reader. Can I come round to the window? No, this is the system. You have to give the order here. We can't take it at the window. So I drive round to the window and I pay and I drive to collect it. And 2 kids sit on the back seat. I hand them 20 double cheeseburgers. There's no fries, not 1 drink, nothing. So I've worked a very good way around that now. I phone my friend, I text her the order, I wind my window down and I'm on loudspeaker in my car. And we manage that way. She manages to order a McDonald's for me. But people are just not accepting. It's the same at KFC. They're not things I go do, so I don't know how to do it. But when you get there, they are quite brusque with you, that they won't allow you that freedom. We rely on daily things. So the shower. And this has come about, I'm projecting forward to January, but I'll come back. So for example, like getting in the shower, I have to have my daughter or my husband around. People say to me, well, why don't you just lock the door? Then nobody can come in. So my brain, yeah, I can lock the door. I'll go up for a shower. Gosh, what happens if I slip? Not a problem. I'll take my phone in the bathroom. So then I think, yeah, but what happens if I slip and I have to call an ambulance? That'll be all right. I'll crawl on the floor. And then suddenly it says, what are you actually going to do? Because how's the ambulance man going to get in? Because you've locked the door. So even something simple as having a shower is difficult. Somebody checking I've turned the taps off because I can't hear them. It's very difficult. Years ago, me and my sister, as we're both deaf, when we watch a movie, the sound is up really loud, even though we can't hear it, because we can hear the vibration of the music on the floor. So we were at her house, and she lives quite near a main road, and we were watching Grease. Glass of wine, popcorn, the lot. There we were watching this movie, really enjoying ourselves, singing along out of tune with only the words that we could remember from when we were 15 or whatever, because we can't hear them now. Anyway, suddenly the front door burst open and in came 4 firemen. And it's like, what is happening here? And they said, can't you hear the fire engines outside and see the blue lights? You've got a chimney fire, we need to evacuate. Well, we didn't feel stupid, we just felt inadequate because it kind of raised, it might be funny at the time, but it really isn't funny because that's not something we can cope with in our life. Last year, I was offered a cochlear implant. It was a big decision and it wasn't easy going through all the tests and the anticipation of what that would bring for me. Chris Rain was great, talking me through many, many things that I might not have been able to ask if not. And eventually, when the time came, they said to me, yep, we've got an appointment for you. It will be in January. So that was great and got through Christmas, prepared myself for a bit of quiet time, the operation, you've got to wait a few weeks before you get a switch on. I didn't expect miracles. If it just worked, I would be really grateful because I knew with hard work, I would be in a better position than I was. So as January came and we had the bad snow and ice, about 5 days before my surgery, I also managed to throw myself flat on my face in a playground and break my arm. And I remember, well, obviously I can't call Chris because I can't hear, but one of my daughters called Chris and said, what are we going to do? Because this is, you know, she's desperate. She's worked herself up for this. It's whatever. And Chris did very kindly. He talked on my behalf with everybody in the surgical team, himself included, to say, look, if you have this type of cast, if you do these things, we'll still go ahead. And it was quite one of my favourite pictures for a long time when I waddled out of the surgery that day with the cochlear implant, the bandages, the broken arm, but a t-shirt proudly displaying that I was now a cochlear implant wearer. And yes, it has been very hard work, but I do know that the way I hear now, and I say hear in inverted commas, is going to give me contact with people along with my British Sign Language for quite a long time into the future. And Cheryl, it is impossible to project yourself into a deaf world. You just can't. Imagine on a night time when you take out or take off your implant or your hearing aids, you lay in the dark and you can hear nothing. It's quite a fearful time. You don't know if somebody's in the house. People say, well, get a dog. Okay. Well, I can't hear the dog barking, so I'm not entirely sure how that would help. I can't stay by myself. If my husband's not at home, one of my daughters come to stay. However, very sadly, my daughters are suffering the same hearing loss. So now what happens is I have to pack a bag up to go to their house where they are supported. Hearing loss has many facets to it, and not all of them are easy. There's many negative attitudes towards deafness, but for sure our struggle is real. My struggle is real every day. And even though I talk about deaf awareness, I can get very emotional and very upset and very frustrated. And so to finish with, deafness really is an invisible disability. And we in our Rotary clubs can make deaf awareness so much more appreciated, because our club experience relies on communication. And without it, people will stop coming. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Trish.
You're welcome.
Right, so not many comments here in the chat, but Andrew, do you want to read out what Mark said?
Yes, so Mark, his comment was very interesting comment about not being accepted by the deaf community. This is a barrier that should not exist. Also, regional variations in BSL is another thing that lots do not comprehend. It's just another accent. Another thing that is not readily understood is that those who are deaf from birth do not want to lose their identity and get a cochlear implant.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. You do. In my first year of BSL at Bradford University, my teacher was deaf from birth, and they would make jokes about cochlear implant. Oh, you don't want one of them. When you walk past your fridge, your implant will fly off, you know, the magnet in it and various whatevers. They would, I've not actually seen them since I've had an implant, because they are very anti-implant. They have, she's called Mary, she has a granddaughter who is hearing, and her sister is hearing. She is the only one that is deaf. And I think the stigma that surrounds that is, and I'm sure Chris would understand this because he will see this as a surgeon, you can have a baby that is born deaf to hearing parents. You can have a baby that is born deaf to deaf parents. you can absolutely guarantee pretty much the children whose parents will come forward to try and get whatever help they can will be the hearing parents. First of all, because they can't communicate with their child. You know, there are 6 levels to learning British Sign Language. You don't learn them in a year. It can take up to 6 years to become fluent, but your child is then 6. So if you have a deaf child born to deaf parents, they have a bigger chance of learning British Sign Language, but they have a lesser chance of learning to speak and to communicate. And that is because their parents believe in deaf culture and that you are trying to change something that isn't broken. But it is broken because the majority of people are born hearing. It is a very difficult thing, and I wouldn't try and persuade people either way. And also, commenting on British Sign Language, I have 2 teachers and both of them say words in different manners. So they say, one says water, one says water. And it's like, why there just isn't one is very difficult. But yeah, it's a very interesting comment about deaf children born from being, being deaf from being born.
Mm. Thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to make a comment? I thought, Sue, you might want to. Yeah, go on, Sue, go for it.
Evening. Hi, my son was born in Zimbabwe. We lived in Botswana, and he wasn't given screening test, and the pediatrician at 9 months happened to scratch the surface of the bed he was lying on. And it took 5 months to get him diagnosed profoundly deaf from that point. But the challenge of teaching your child sign language and like, if I can use Bristol as an example, Bristol, Bath, it's almost like an accent. The sign language changes from place to place. And so I am 90% of deaf children are, that are born deaf, have hearing parents with no experience of deafness. So that was a huge challenge, and I completely relate to everything you've said. So, yeah.
And just something to say that your Sue's story, I know Sue, she's a member of this group, and Sue's story is so interesting that we've asked her if she could actually speak sometime in the new year about her experiences and her son Ewan's experience. So that's something to look forward to.
Thank you.
Rob Morris, you've got your hand up.
I have. Thanks, Jill, and thanks, Trish, for that very insightful talk as well. I recognised a lot of it. My wife wears hearing aids now. So, and my late uncle went deaf in later life, and he tried all sorts of hearing aids, but they didn't work. And he'd been president of his Probus Club, and in the end he resigned because he couldn't hear the speakers. So he no longer had any enjoyment. He could. And if he was talking to people, there was so much background noise in the room, he actually couldn't hear. So I'm just thinking out aloud here, really, that in Rotary clubs, we must have a lot of people who are hard of hearing or suffering hearing loss. So it's 2 questions, really. So what can we do to help those people in Rotary? I know you mentioned a few things in your speech. So what can we do to help them? And how can we reach out to the deaf community and even have a specialist club, for deaf people who've got hearing problems?
I think in my club, people, when I introduced a system called RedCat, which was our first system that is used in schools, I borrowed it from a hearing company, and it costs around £1,200. It's a plug and go system, but it has specialised clarity, and it is used in deaf schools. You don't have to link to it, you don't have to Bluetooth to it or anything like that. It literally plugs in and goes. And eventually, as we started using this in our club, it came out of the woodwork where people said, oh yeah, don't stop using that system because we really like it. And I think out of our regular lunchtime, 16 to 18 people at that time, 10 wore hearing aids. And I'd not even really noticed because, again, nobody speaks about it freely. I also use a system called Caption Ed, and Chris, again, is brilliant at getting that. He puts it to PowerPoints, he puts it to presentations, so that when people come to our club, we can actually now have live captions on the screen. One of the things you can do, we use it also at our conference. It's about, if you want a professional version, it is about £50 a month, and it is super accurate. People can have it on their telephone or a little iPad in front of them, and you link whatever your microphone system is to Caption Ed, and it will display it on a screen. There are quite a lot of microphone systems. I know, again, Chris from my club, he worked with an audiologist locally to us and improved our system greatly, but probably out of the general pennies that most clubs could afford. But the Red Cat system is quite affordable, and I think for about £1,200 comes with a mic and a net mic, and honestly the difference is brilliant. I do have a demo one. I'm always happy to pop round to any clubs, if you know, obviously within decent driving distance or whatever, and never for them to have a go with it. But I think club experience is vital. I was at a charter dinner a few months ago when my husband was district governor, and for some reason when they set the microphone system up and the screen for the speaker, it was at the opposite end of the room to what they'd asked for. So I was actually sat behind a pillar and I was at the back of the room, and the president came afterwards and he was mortified because I was never going to catch anything from the speaker. So that's the other thing, is being aware of where people sit, making sure that speech and clarity, that it's quiet. If you're in a hall, I mean, I never go to a meeting at a pub. So if that's what a club meets at, it's not one that I would go to. It has to be a quiet room and give people the best chance.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew, you've got your hand raised.
I'm going to take advantage of my own position here. And those of you who don't know me, I will probably come over as an awkward old bastard, but I was born as being awkward, so there we go. I lost my hearing 12 years ago. I was 58, right? So I'm now severely deaf. I work like hell to try and hear what people say. I really, really do. Yeah, go to a meeting, fall asleep afterwards because it's such hard work. And you know what? At those meetings, they're full of people. They are full of people who try and think, oh yeah, he's deaf. We'll try and get somewhere with him. And you ask them to repeat themselves twice, and they, as you say, they give up and walk away. Right? So I've worked out that, right, I can't do anything more. The people that I talk to are trying really hard, but what's going wrong? They don't understand. They don't know. Right? They do not know that you don't turn away from people. You don't put your hand in front of your mouth. You don't talk quietly. Right? They don't know. It needs somebody to tell them. Now, this is the self-advertising. Jill and I started a charity called Hearing Ambassadors, and that's what we do. The first thing that we will do is give a cover presentation, and hopefully the members will work out how you actually communicate with somebody. Then they can move on to the sophisticated stuff, because they're actually got the groundwork, and the sophisticated stuff can fill in the gaps. Right? So that's one of the key things. Education, but not education for the hard of hearing. Education for the people who can hear. Right? If you teach people to hear, when you go to sign in at a hotel, right, and the receptionist is sitting at the desk with their head down, looking at a screen, right? They can't hear what you're saying. They can hear perfectly, right? You can't read the top of somebody's head. It's just that training. So one last thing. I have come across quite a few people who were are profoundly deaf from birth. They should command the hearing person's absolute respect. Absolute respect. You try to work out how anybody can teach somebody who cannot hear to speak. Right? You think about it, it's very difficult for a hearing person, but you're trying to teach somebody to speak. So you say something, but they can't hear you. Right? Oh, they can lip read, but they don't know what the lips mean. Right? They deserve your absolute respect. They don't maybe live in a different world from you, but you should respect that world for the value it has.